Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In November 2007, in the inner western suburb of St Peters, Sydney, Australia, a young man named Yock moved into what would prove to be far more than just another weatherboard cottage. The house, standing distinctly larger than its neighbouring terrace-style buildings, caught his attention through a flatmate wanted advertisement. Its worn appearance and unique architectural elements appealed to his taste for the unconventional, leading him to immediately secure the available room from the current tenant, known as SL. The property itself was situated in a historically industrial area where workers' housing had sprung up decades earlier. The cottage, constructed of weatherboard and possibly containing asbestos, stood as one of the few single-storey homes that broke the uniform line of identical terraces along the street. Like many buildings in St Peters, it carried the weight of years within its walls. During the early weeks of his residency, Yock and SL would often find themselves engaged in thoughtful discussions about spirituality and supernatural phenomena, while sharing beers on the front porch. SL, who had researched the topic extensively, once directly asked Yock if he believed the house was haunted. At that point, Yock couldn't provide a definitive answer, though he had detected something subtle, a presence that lingered just at the edge of perception. Yock, who possessed what he described as a built-in sensitivity to the dead, was no stranger to paranormal encounters, yet he maintained a measured approach, allowing the house to reveal its secrets gradually rather than actively seeking them out. The first hints came in the form of the familiar, more dismissible haunted house sensations, the feeling of being watched and the inherent eeriness that old houses exhibit after dark. The true nature of the house's spectral resident only emerged when circumstances aligned perfectly. SL had departed for a few days to visit friends in Katoomba, and their newest flatmate, who had signed on just a week before, was also absent, leaving Yock alone in the house for the first time since moving in. The solitude seemed to act as a catalyst, creating conditions that allowed the house's hidden occupant to manifest more boldly. According to Yock, the entity appeared to prefer isolation, choosing to reveal itself only when other living residents were absent. This selective appearance aligned with Yock's previous experiences. Spirits often seemed drawn to his sensitivity, able to recognise his ability to perceive them. The first signs of activity centred around the bathroom and toilet area at the rear of the house. While using these facilities, Yock would regularly hear heavy, deliberate footsteps moving across the old floorboards, accompanied by the sounds of hurried activity and indistinct voices engaged in conversation. Each time he emerged to investigate, he found the house empty and undisturbed, despite the clear sounds of movement he'd heard moments before. This pattern of activity began to affect his sense of security, as he frequently believed someone had returned home, only to find himself still alone in the house. The defining moment occurred as Yock prepared for an evening out with his brother in the city. While tying his shoelaces in his bedroom, one foot propped on his computer chair, he became aware of a presence at his partially open door to his left. There, standing roughly a foot back from the doorway in the lounge room, was a distinct figure, just watching. Though its head remained out of view, Yock could clearly observe most of the lower half and parts of the right side of its body. The apparition, which Yock strongly felt was male, manifested with remarkable clarity. It appeared as a form composed of concentrated dust clouds with a greyish-yellow hue, denser around the accented lines of its form, accompanied by subtle residual glow. In that frozen moment of recognition, Yock took time to process what he was seeing. When his initial startled movement caused the figure to vanish, his response was surprisingly good-natured. Rather than fear, he laughed heartily and addressed the spirit directly, saying, "Hey, you scared the hell out of me, man." His reasoning was simple. Since the entity gave off no negative energy, he felt no need for alarm. This encounter marked a turning point in the house's atmosphere. Yock noted that the overall mood of the property seemed to lighten afterward, suggesting his accepting reaction may have helped establish a kind of understanding with the resident's spirit. When he later shared his experience with SL over the phone, his flatmate's excitement was tinged with a hint of envy, having lived in the house longer without witnessing any direct manifestations. Yock explained that in his experience, spirits often choose their witnesses selectively. Prior to his St. Peter's experience, Yock had spent 6 months living and working in Brisbane, residing in a beautiful old Queenslander, a traditional elevated timber house in the inner suburb of Spring Hill. Despite the age and character of the building, paranormal activity had been surprisingly minimal. His only questionable experience there involved a brief sighting of a dark shadow figure standing in one of the doorways leading from the lounge room, though he remained uncertain about the reality of this encounter. However, his residence before the Queensland move had proved far more supernaturally active. The house was home to 2 contrasting entities whose natures stood in stark opposition to each other. The interior spirit, which Yock characterised as a lone soldier or sentinel, maintained a protective but emotionally neutral presence. While its form could often be glimpsed in the darkness of the laundry and toilet areas, Yock initially dismissed these sightings as tricks of light and shadow, partly to maintain his own peace of mind. His most significant encounter with this soldier-like spirit occurred during a nighttime walk from the kitchen to the small sunroom, where he was sleeping at the time. The path required him to traverse the dining room and lounge. The dining room light was almost always on, since no one in the house had any real sleeping pattern. The lounge light usually remained on until 12 a.m, sometimes as late as 2 a.m, and the front room had a lamp which he used. All in all, the place was usually well lit. As he passed through the dining room, Yock noticed the sentinel-like figure standing at the doorway to the lounge, just beyond the reach of the dining room light. The entity appeared shorter than Yock, but maintained a military bearing, its form manifesting in a rusty red colour with blurred edges. Rather than panic, Yock simply stopped and blinked several times, fully aware of what he was witnessing. Drawing on his previous experience, having once walked through a ghost, an experience he strongly advises against, Yock waited respectfully. The spirit seemed to acknowledge his presence by stepping aside and changing its orientation, as if granting him passage. Yock responded to this courtesy by thanking the entity as he passed through the doorway. The second entity at this residence, which Yock termed the outsider, proved more problematic. Its behaviour suggested immaturity, manifesting in attention-seeking activities, particularly focused around windows at night. While it would actively try to gain the attention of those inside, it would retreat to shadows when encountered outside, often fleeing when directly approached. Yock's friend Milhouse, who lived in the house, was well acquainted with this entity's antics, as were other temporary residents who had occupied the front room, a particular focus of the spirit's activity. Another friend, Cooper, who had stayed in that room before Yock, reported frequent disturbances outside the window at night. The outsider's attempts to gain Yock's attention typically involved thumping on the window near his head while he worked at his computer, or creating visual disturbances that resembled glowing moths flying erratically around a street lamp, visible through the curtains. These displays would intensify when ignored, continuing until the entity apparently lost interest. Milhouse shared similar experiences, including one particularly memorable incident where their elderly bull terrier had become fixated on the window, growling continuously for approximately an hour. The dog displayed similar behaviour in the backyard, especially near the back fence, where an old barren orange tree stood, a spot where the entity was believed to frequently lurk. Yock's most dramatic encounter with the outsider occurred one night as he returned from the train station. Approaching the house, he observed what appeared to be a tall, skinny and slightly distorted figure near the front room's side window, the same window where it frequently attempted to attract his attention. Upon noticing Yock, the entity fled toward the backyard, its form growing increasingly tall and gangly before silently disappearing over the fence. Upon entering the house, Yock found Milhouse in the front room at his computer and asked if he had experienced any unusual activity near his window. Milhouse's surprised response, "How did you know?" confirmed the shared nature of their experiences. Yock's paranormal experiences extended beyond his own residences to his ex-girlfriend's house, where 4 distinct spirits maintained an active presence. The most prominent of these was her deceased uncle, a Catholic priest who had succumbed to cancer in what had been his bedroom at the front of the house. His continued presence manifested most commonly through sudden inexplicable cold spots, where occupants' breath would become visible for periods before conditions returned to normal. While Yock had never witnessed it himself, others reported seeing the priest's reflection in computer screens, particularly when focusing on the monitor's surface. The second spirit appeared to be the property's original owner, who maintained a hostile attitude toward new occupants. Although Yock never directly observed this entity, described by witnesses as a very angry-looking elderly man, he frequently sensed its presence in the lounge room. The third spirit remained largely undefined and passive, rarely making itself known, but maintaining a constant presence in the background of the house's supernatural activity. The fourth entity, a shadow man, proved particularly intriguing due to its unusual freedom of movement throughout the property. Unlike the other spirits, which seemed confined to specific rooms or the ground level, this entity could access all areas of the house, including the upper level that had been constructed only 2 decades earlier. Yock speculated that this spirit's presence might be connected to the property's location along a dangerous main road, which had claimed multiple lives due to its hazardous corners and high accident rate. The shadow man, while not overtly malevolent, created a persistent sense of unease. Yock encountered this entity most frequently on the staircase, with one particular incident standing out in his memory. While ascending the stairs for the first time since becoming aware of the presence, Yock observed the figure standing approximately halfway up, gripping the banister. Initially, he attempted to rationalise the sight as a visual anomaly caused by tired eyes. However, upon reaching the same step where the entity stood, Yock experienced an overwhelming surge of negative emotions and fear. These feelings vanished as suddenly as they had appeared once he moved to the next step, suggesting the spirit had chosen to remain stationary rather than attach itself to him, a capability that Yock acknowledged some spirits possessed. Beyond his personal experiences, Yock shared two remarkable accounts from acquaintances. The first involved a skinhead known as Bug, whose sceptical nature made his paranormal encounter particularly compelling. Bug and another skinhead friend, while intoxicated, had decided to spend the night at the old quarantine station on Sydney's North Shore, a decision Bug would come to regret deeply. During the exploration of the facility, Bug experienced a violent tugging on his arm as he opened one particular door. Later, finding himself alone in a hallway, he encountered two twin girls dressed in vintage clothing. The sight of these apparitions moving toward him prompted Bug to flee in terror, running up the road and over the fence at full speed. After catching his breath, Bug received a phone call from his friend asking about his sudden departure. Before Bug could fully explain, his friend's question was interrupted by his own terrified exclamation, followed by the sound of him scrambling over the fence to join Bug. As it turned out, his friend had encountered the same twin girls, lending credibility to their shared experience. The second account came from Tabby, Yock's former babysitter from his time in Western Australia. She related a disturbing experience from a school camp held at the Old York Hospital, located approximately 300 kilometres east of Perth. Throughout the night, students witnessed unexplained phenomena, including strange noises, screams, banging sounds emanating from inside a wardrobe in the girls' room, movement of unoccupied beds, and lights flickering on and off without explanation. The incident left a lasting impression on all who experienced it, with none of the students managing to sleep that night. Throughout his various encounters, Yock maintained a remarkably balanced perspective toward the paranormal. His sensitivity to spiritual energy, while not always welcome, provided him with unique insights into the complex relationship between the physical and spiritual realms. His experiences demonstrated that haunted locations often harbour multiple entities with distinct personalities and behaviours, ranging from protective to mischievous, from benign to troubling. Most significantly, his accounts suggested that spirits often exhibit selective visibility, choosing their witnesses carefully and responding to the energy and attitudes of the living occupants sharing their space.